Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Alpha Bunga Bunga. It's Tuesday, the 30th of November. I'm Alex Hochuli. I'm joined, as usual, by Philip Cunliffe. Hi, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Our punning quotient will be significantly reduced today because George Hoare is away, so no George today. But we're joined by Douglas Lain. Hi, Doug.
Hi. Glad to be on.
Yeah, very good to have you back on. Listeners will probably know you as, or will have known you as the publisher of Zer0 Books, but he's now off starting new ventures, specifically at Diet Soap, which is a soon-to-be a media empire, but for the moment is a YouTube channel, a podcast, and soon to be a publishing house. We're looking forward to seeing what DSM has in store for us. We're going to be talking about that and Doug's plans in just a bit, and we're also going to be talking a little bit more widely about other things. But these have been, I guess, turbulent times. Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a kind of a rough year, but I'm all right. I've come out the other side of it, I hope. Well, soon enough, we'll see what 2022 sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, So for listeners, I mean, this might be a little bit inside baseball, as Americans like to say, but we're going to talk a little bit about what happened with Zer0 Books. But we're also going to dedicate a lot more of the time talking about the left, which is our favorite subject, but about the Gen X left in comparison to the millennial left and where we are today. Because we're going to be talking a little bit about No Logo, my favorite book when I was 15 for about 3 months, which is no indication whatsoever as to its quality because I was an idiot. But you're supposed to be an idiot at that age, I suppose.
Yeah.
Seen but not heard. That's my attitude. Anyway, so I actually wanted to start this off by referring to an upcoming video that you're doing for Diet Soap. You sent me the script of it, where you asked provocatively, is it time for the left to start defending neoliberalism? And the answer, and I guess apologies for the spoiler here, is no, of course, no. And actually, I'd probably add, and you hint at this as well, is that the reality is that in light of a supposed nationalist backlash, Trump, et cetera, the left has actually been defending neoliberalism in recent years. And which is the point that we make. We make it in The End of History, our book, which was published on Zer0 Books, that the left, faced with the end of history, has largely cowered from the new realities and the new openings that this period might afford, and actually has been affected by knobs, by neoliberal order breakdown syndrome, almost as much as the liberal mainstream, and probably more than traditional conservatives have. So we're going to be talking about the left in just a little bit in trying to connect up some different discussions about the left, because there's the one that we present in the book, in the end of history, which came out 5 months ago on Zer0 Books. And if you haven't bought a copy yet, I'm amazed because you're listening to this podcast and you haven't bought it yet, but there's still time. It's still out there being sold. But so the history that we present there, especially in the introduction, is kind of a potted history of what the left has done over the past 30 years and what changed as of maybe 2016. But also, Doug, you've been putting out videos on your channels and podcasts and these great 20-minute YouTube videos, which you're continuing to do on Diet Soap now, on critical theory and the left, and which often deals with things like questions like the legacies of the new left and kind of how the left has transformed over recent periods, and trying to provide listeners and start a discussion, I guess, to generate a sort of sense of greater self-consciousness about what the left is and what the kind of historical possibilities are today. We're going to get to all of this, and I should stop talking and I bring Doug in because I guess that just the simple question is Zer0 Books, what happened, to the extent that you can talk about it, because there may be some legal issues with certain things. But just give us, for listeners who won't be familiar with this, who won't have followed this sort of inside lefty stuff, what's actually happened.
Well, I want to start by saying what didn't happen. What didn't happen is that I was not fired because I tweeted that I like Dave Chappelle. That didn't happen. That was the rumor that people were passing around. I discovered some people with a lot of glee were celebrating the demise of the shitlord Doug Lain. But that's not what happened. What happened is, do you like
Dave Chappelle?
I do like Dave Chappelle. Yeah.
All right. Just to get it out there.
Would have been a better story, I guess. But let's go with the truth.
Yeah, I did tweet in support of Dave Chappelle at an inopportune moment, and I was ratioed quite severely for it. But that did not lead to my termination. So what happened instead was that John Hunt of John Hunt Publishing sold his company, all of it, not just Zer0 Books, but all the imprints, to Watkins Publishing. And Watkins Publishing is the parent company of an imprint called Repeater. And Repeater is the imprint that Tariq Goddard and others started when they left Zer0 Books in 2014. So when Watkins Publishing purchased John Hunt Publishing, what that meant was the people at Repeater were getting their imprint back. When they left John Hunt Publishing, originally they had intended to bring Zer0 Books with them wherever they were going next. John Hunt, who owned the imprint, did not let them. And they spent, I guess, the last 6 years pining away for it. So they've gotten it back. And good for them, because they published a lot of good stuff when they were there. I'm sure they'll continue to publish interesting books going forward. So that wasn't really an issue in dispute. But when they got the imprint back, I was either let go or demoted or something. I was told no longer to do my job, which was to select books to publish and issue contracts. That I was not going to be doing that going forward. That Repeater wanted Zer0 Books. That's what I was told, and which was just disconcerting, because it meant I didn't have a job as far as I could tell. But the other thing that happened was the YouTube channel and Patreon that I had set up while I was at Zer0 Books was apparently sold as a part of the deal. And that I didn't appreciate, because I thought of it as my own. I was a freelancer working without a contract. And that meant the rights were mine to the content I produced, as far as I could tell. I kept actually asking for a contract that would spell out that I was holding on to those rights, and was sort of told, in principle, we would agree with you, that kind of thing. But I didn't ever get one. So no contract was ever put forward. However, at this point, I should say unequivocally that I have relinquished all claims to the YouTube channel and the previous Patreon, that I have no legal rights to them anymore. And the people at Repeater and at Watkins do. They own those channels now. So that's all behind me. But that was what the dispute was really about, was whether or not I could hold on to those.
Before we go any further, I'm going to say this now, but I'm going to say it later as well, that listeners should follow Doug's channels. Doug, why don't you tell us where to find them, given that you had to relinquish control of the previous channels,
so
previous assets?
The big one to go to is Patreon, patreon.com/diet soap. That's where you can give me your money. And then if you want to follow me on YouTube, which you absolutely should as well, just search for Douglas Lain, or it's YouTube.com/Doug Lain, and you'll find my YouTube channel, which is a continuation to a large degree of what I was doing before. Some of the thumbnails might look a little different than how they looked at the other place, but pretty much it's the same stuff. Podcasts on a weekly basis, critical theory, montage videos, and a few more things are going to come along. Pop the Left will come back, for instance.
Excellent. What was Pop the Left for? I mean, I used to listen to it ages ago.
Pop the Left was what I did with Derek Varn so that he would get a chance on a bi-weekly basis to yell at me. But it was a history. We looked at the history of socialism and tried to, at the same time, pop the illusions of the contemporary left and comment on the contemporary scene as well. So we would look through the history of socialism in a kind of eclectic or arbitrary way. We didn't start at the beginning and go all the way to the end or anything like that, but we did a whole series on utopian socialism. We did the question of dual power. We looked at the revolution of 1848. Those kinds of, we would just sort of cover historical moments and thinkers. And then, I would be told all the ways in which I was wrong. In private parrot room struggle sessions for patrons only.
Very good. So that people should definitely go and check out. I mean, I have to say that following this, kind of from afar, as it were, I mean, not being directly connected, but obviously, being friends with you on Facebook and seeing what's coming out and all that, it's all, kind of unedifying and just kind of squabbling. And you have to say that some of the statements that what are they called? Continuity Zer0 Books, or well, anyway, the repeater books people are, just kind of, it seems unnecessary and incredibly petty. And people who maybe know less than I do have asked me even like, oh, what's the, what's the in on this? Like, what's the politics behind this? Because whenever there's some sort of, put in kind of general terms like left split, you want to be like, oh, what's the politics behind this? What are the implications here? Do you think that there's nothing, or I mean, because they've made some statements like, some insinuations that there's general populist infiltration, around the world, but also at Zer0 Books and things like this, which,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would say that, frankly, I haven't paid enough attention to what Repeater Books did to know what their politics are. So I can't speak to what their politics are in any competent way, but I will say that, in terms of some of the allegations that were put forward about our supposed rightward turn, I don't think that holds up to scrutiny because, for instance, a big deal has been made about Zer0 Books' relationship with Spiked. Philip, you are part of the problem here.
I believe me, I know. I've been part of the problem for many years.
But the truth is that before I started at Zer0 Books, the imprint had published a number of people who were affiliated with Spiked. So that's not a change. And I would stand behind any of the books that we published. And I don't think any of them are reactionary. Although I'm not overall aligned with Spiked. I think that that overall that like Spiked has given up on the working class way too much. And I think Brendan O'Neill is kind of a shadow of his former self. He's become one of these anti-woke people who, it's boring at this point. So that would be one thing that I was accused of. The other thing that would sometimes happen is I get smeared as the publisher of a guy named Gilad Atzmon. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure. But he's an anti-Semite and a Jew, an Israeli. And the book that was published was called The Wandering Who, which I worked to get off the imprint's back catalog and shifted to another imprint that JHP owned, which was like a compromise position. So that was published again by the people who are taking it now. They published that. I'm sure they thought they now regret it, but there was a scandal around that book. And I'm usually pretty much completely like a free speech absolutist, but that book turned my stomach, and that I went
as an editorial decision, not necessarily as a question of free speech, but as an
right, exactly. I would never have published that book. So
there was also flack for Angela Nagel's book, given subsequent, her criticisms of the left in Kill All Normies, but then also subsequently the position she took on immigration. And what struck me as odd about that also was the idea that publishers, have to kind of agree with everything that their writers say. Yeah. An absurd position, entirely absurd.
Right. The thing about Angela Nagle is, I really actually, her book Kill All Normies is one of the high points, I think, for the time I was at Zer0. It did very well. It was timed well. It was a really good book, despite some of the copy editing problems. It was well written. So I absolutely stand by Kill All Normies as a book people should still read. Angela Nagle's turn, I can't make heads or tails out of it. Her position on open borders is one thing. Since then, she's also kind of gone on an anti-left tear, I think, a little bit, which I am critical of. Overall, though, my position has been like towards all the books that we publish that because I do what's called content marketing, meaning I create videos and podcasts to get people's attention for the books, I'm not constrained to like or agree with the authors that we publish. So like I was critical of Nagel around the question of immigration. I think in a pretty fair way. So yeah, I wouldn't, again, like I wouldn't back down from having supported that book and being proud of publishing it. If Nagel wanted to write a book that was on the left socialist book that was as good as that one, I would publish her again, despite some of her statements. But I'm not that keen on the anti-left Marxists or whatever. And that doesn't mean I would never work with any of them, but I just don't. I'm not aligned with that position.
Well, I mean, we can get onto some of that in a bit. I mean, I think part of what you've all just said really is that, well, it speaks to the problem of the desire to enforce orthodoxy on the left, guilt by association, the insistence that a publisher, for example, or a magazine be held accountable for every single thing that they publish. Not that things shouldn't be argued about, or that, if say a magazine publishes an article which is terrible, people that shouldn't be argued about, but the kind of people just not understanding really the difference between free speech and editorial decisions, trying to hold people to account for providing a kind of wide platform for different people, all these kinds of things. Basically, to sum it up, I guess, the left's aversion to open debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, most of those charges, when they're coming from the people who are taking, who purchased Zer0 Books, they didn't take anything; they bought it. I think it's just opportunism. I don't think that that's really what's behind it. The main charge that was leveled at me for years was that I was a scab because I took the job of being the publishing manager after they had quit and started another imprint, but weren't allowed to take the brand with them. I don't think that. I think calling me a scab is the wrong word. Maybe from their perspective, I was a jerk, but I wasn't a scab.
Well, and that's another thing. Reaching for kind of larger political terms with wider significations when maybe someone's just being a jerk as a suggestion. I'm not calling you a jerk.
From my perspective, look, it was a great opportunity to take a job that I really enjoy doing, and I didn't tell them that they couldn't take the imprint with them. That was John Hunt. And, I didn't know them. I was this American, this unwashed, uncouth, ugly American stepping in. I didn't even know when tea time was, so yeah. But in any case, I think that's really what's behind some of the animosity you're hearing from them, is this sort of long-standing resentment that was probably originally aimed at John Hunt, and just sort of I got some of it because I continued the imprint past the point when they would have wanted it to continue.
So I suppose broadening out the discussion then from, and given you're in the position of launching something new, and your experience that you've just been recounting, how do you see the task of left media and publishing? And is it like something like preserving a certain kind of method or approach? Or is it to innovate something new and to build constituencies where they don't exist at the moment?
Well, I would love to try to build constituencies or bring people into a movement or a party, but I don't think that's what Dialectical media is going to be designed to do. If anything, we're going to publish. We already have our first book selected. It's Todd McGowan's book called "Enjoying It Right and Left."
Oh, excellent!
That's a good author to start with. That's really great.
Yeah, and the point of what we're trying to do now going forward is we're going to publish fewer books than I did at Zer0, and we're going to select them with a bit more care. And the idea is to try to introduce the notion of dialectical thinking to the Anglophone left, to try to get over try to move past the impasse and break from the tendency to repeat, and just go back into the earlier problems, by pushing this idea that you can't truly understand a political problem or a contradiction in society simply by taking a one-sided moralistic view of it. So, like, for instance, on the question of family values, the progressive far left often takes an anti-family stance, sees the institution as patriarchal, oppressive of women, backwards, often religious in ways that are detrimental to human freedom, and so on. I don't disagree with a lot of that assessment of the family, but at the same time, I feel as though the left should recognize that it is also, as Christopher Lasch said, a haven in a heartless world. It's a realm of meaning and of personal connection and intimacy. And as broken as it is, and as dysfunctional as it is because of the way it's situated in a world that is heartless and cruel and alien, nonetheless, it can't simply be rejected. So thinking through what the left's relationship should be to the family, what kinds of supports working class families need, and what our attitudes might be, would be something that I would want to tackle going forward. There's actually a book on the family that might be coming out as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that the more dialectical approach to these questions is absolutely needed. I guess maybe to play devil's advocate on this, actually, because it doesn't necessarily represent my view exactly. But I think the argument on the part of some is that the general trend in capitalism, to put it simply, is fragmentary, dissolving the family, etc. Basically impeding the possibility even of developing kind of a family or a stable sort of home life or anything like that, and that therefore it is an imperative to somehow do the opposite, to defend the family against, and if even whatever points the progressive left might have, ultimately they are on the side of capitalism. They're on the side of the disintegrative forces, and therefore you need to defend the family. I mean, that's an argument that someone would make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, okay, so I think you go too far to say that the people who are critiquing the family for along the lines that I originally stated are on the side of capitalism, because that's the weird thing about capitalism is that if you're trying to preserve the family, you're also on the side of capitalism, because capitalism is a contradictory, meandering force, and that's certainly ideologically and culturally. And so, like, defending the family, attacking the family, both things service capital in different historical moments, but I think what needs to be recognized is that what the conservative pro-family position has right is that working class people, all people, but specifically working class people, because they're the radical subjects here, require a stable, meaningful life of connection in order to be able to start functioning as agents of change. And so when we think about what kinds of supports we need to give, or what kinds of policies or proposals or movements we want to make, we should not be allergic to some of them that are in support of family life. And like, for instance, parental rights or something like that. That's not always a conservative thing to struggle for, but it does depend on the moment.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. I think as a task or as a way to conceive of an intellectual project, I think today. Hi there, listener. If you're new to us, I just wanted to say that a lot of the discussion we're about to have here refers to the question of generational politics. So you might want to check out our special 5-part series on the history of generations and the current generation war. It's called OK Bunga, the Problem of Generations, and you can find a link in the show notes or go to bungacast.com/series/generations. But for now, I think we do have to revisit the trauma And we'll talk about Gen X, the Gen X left.
The big trauma for me is my divorce, by the way. And speaking of family,
so it's much more immediate. Yeah, we're talking about deep buried traumas of Generation X. So you've written this thing about no logo, which, if anything, I think pretty much sums up the Gen X left, or I guess it's a later end of Gen X, really, because the Gen X left, as listeners to our series, OK Bunger, on the history of generational conflict, will have heard, that the Generation X is the generation of the end of history, and in some sense contained all those disappointments of the failures of 68 and that whole moment, and also the experience of a rising neoliberalism and the end of the USSR and all the rest. But let's talk about no logo specifically, because you've just written this thing. I read the script that you sent me for the video that you're putting out, and it's interesting that sort of anti-branding attitude, anti-advertising, all that kind of no logo, ad busters politics, which was very of the moment in the mid 90s, late 90s, has completely disappeared. And maybe it's that we're now too cynical and that we don't even buy advertising. So you can't even say, hey, stop buying into what the advertisers are telling you. Or alternatively, that we are now all marketeers ourselves and that we've been fully subsumed.
I just want to contest this idea that it's completely disappeared, because Adbusters still exists. It's putting out. I mean, Adbusters put out
in the Pacific Northwest, where you live. I totally understand that might still be a thing. I'm talking about what I know. Okay, it might be different.
No. I mean, you're right that as far as being a dominant voice on the left, it did disappear. But it didn't disappear in '99. It disappeared after 2011. Adbusters and was part of the Occupy movement. I think it was Adbusters that put forward the call.
Yeah.
Am I misremembering?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So that kind of anti-corporate, anti-advertising, anti-consumerist left dominated even after the new normal took hold after 9/11. It dominated even after the economic crisis of 2008, which is when I broke from it. That's when I became a Marxist instead of a rad lib anarchist or something, because I didn't look when the economic crisis hit. I was working at a call center at Comcast, and I wasn't sure, and I had a novel in with a publisher, and I just felt like my big career ambitions were being dashed upon the rocks of the breaking U.S. economy, and so I realized that my anti-consumerist, austerity-minded anarchism was not of the moment, did not help me at all understand what the reality of politics were after 2008. We're turning to no logo now in a moment where the issue of branding is, actually on my mind for kind of really personal reasons or particular reasons. I was wanting to know, is there something there in Naomi Klein's position that deserves to be taken up again? And it certainly is the case that the power of branding and the culture, the corporate culture that we were railing against in the 80s and 90s and beyond has deepened and changed. So there is something to Naomi Klein's no logo position, and I think it has to do with how corporate culture and commodification of all aspects of life changes our understanding of the world and kind of develops an ideology.
Wasn't it that what I recall, this probably with the benefit of hindsight, but I recall it was very quickly absorbed. And within very little time at all, that you had that you'd have it would become kind of part of the syllabus on advertising courses. Ad execs would be talking about no logo, how influential it was, how important it was for their own thinking. And that's the process which Klein, I think, would struggle to really appreciate. Into what actually, the very fact that her own kind of anti-consumerism was repackaged as a kind of consumerism. And like you say, now the way in which kind of branding works is that it's kind of, I mean, I suppose part of it is that it's become even more normalized and covert, so in the sense that it's product placement, which wasn't really a thing as far as I can recall when Naomi Klein kind of published No Logo, it became
it was, but it was like in big Hollywood movies. It wasn't like everywhere. It wasn't like people on TikTok advertising products.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of The Sopranos. So this, The Sopranos moved into product placement, and The Sopranos kind of, whereas I guess it was associated with the big movies, but it didn't become it didn't become TikTok. It wasn't Instagram. It wasn't influencers. That whole thing came later. And that, I guess, is, is that what you mean by the idea that it's become amplified?
Yeah. I think that brands are like I wonder, is Doug Lain a brand now? I mean, I am.
You are, absolutely you are. Yeah. I support that brand against other brands. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would have been something I might have argued. But that wouldn't be the way I want to argue about these things. And so like the notion of the general intellect and the desirability of freely exchanging ideas and using one another's understanding for our own betterment, and certainly like freely creating innovative technologies, that's gone by the wayside. I mean, there's still, I guess, a free software movement, and I'm going to actually talk to one of the advocates of it soon. But I do think that we have a conception, sort of a mystical conception of what a brand is now that is just more fundamental to some people's everyday lives than it had been in the past. And, the obvious thing is like, for a while now, we all have had like an Instagram profile or a Facebook profile, or we're on Twitter, where we develop our brands, even if we're not media people.
I've noticed this in like social media debates on the left, where it's all spoken about, whether people are conscious of it or not, in terms of market positioning. We have positioned ourselves as X. We've come up with a label for whatever our politics is. And we are positioning ourselves like this. So we have to, and it's always it's somehow preempting how it'll be received, and it's positioning in the sort of marketplace. And that's the kind of level of subsumption, which I think is new. And it's funny because I've kind of changed my opinion on this a little bit, because my attitude to that whole anti-branding politics, I'm still very critical of it. But for me, it was like, and as we were writing the book, the end of history, like when we started writing it, which was 2 years ago or something like that, already that was a little bit of a different historical moment, because there were still the kind of some expectations or hopes around left populism, that no logo stuff was completely degenerate, completely obsessed with total simulacra, total domination by brands and whatever, and some idea of being outside of capitalism and of alternative culture and stuff. And that was a complete delusion. Whereas now we're a little bit smarter, because we're talking about power, and maybe too limited to elections, too limited to existing parties, the Labour Party, the Democratic Party, but nevertheless, there's a re-engagement with power. We've left behind the age of, take what is John Holloway's book, what is it? Change the world without taking power, right? We'd left that behind.
Right.
And so for me, it was not just a story of kind of tendential decline since then, but that in some ways there's a resurgence of a moment, or a re-engagement with politics, right? What we argue in the book. What you're saying here, and I kind of agree with it, is that there has maybe been something lost there in terms of a critical attitude. I think what was wrong about No Logo was trying to somehow be outside, somehow trying to carve out a cultural space outside of capitalism. I don't think that's possible, or strategically makes any sense, but at least there was a more critical attitude towards participating in this, whereas now we do it completely gleefully.
I think there's a bit more though, and this I think I'd push, or maybe kind of slice it a different way, and this is picking up a bit on what Doug suggested earlier about the kind of the dialectical approach. I mean, the thing that strikes me the most about kind of branding is that it's kind of a refuge for utopia. And this might not be a popular thing to say, but I mean, it strikes me that it's a car, and it's obviously carved out and individualistic, but it's the realm in which, so if you think of the Instagram influencer perfectly creating the perfect shot, and whereas outside of the frame, everything looks much worse. There's an effort there to shape a certain vision of life that is, that by definition is appealing because lots of people, are attracted to it and they follow the relevant person and so on. And I think the same is generally true of any, or plenty at least of successful advertising campaigns that sell a certain kind of vision of life associated with a product. I mean, I'm always struck, for instance, and maybe this is just how shallow I am, though. I'd like to think that it's that I'm no more shallow than most other people who go to the cinema. But when you see like a car ad before the trailers for a movie, I'm always amazed at the production values and the effort, and also the tremendous attention to a certain kind of vision of life that comes with them. And those seem to me what is appealing about them is that there is a kind of utopian dimension to the way in which brands sell certain kinds of visions of life that you don't get anywhere else, I think. And certainly not on the left. Because, the left really is kind of so absorbed with doom mongering for the most part, with the partial exception, I suppose, of the fully automated luxury opportunist crowd. But apart from then, it's there is nothing.
I want to jump in and see if I can add to what you're saying, because I agree with it in part. And there's a background theoretical position to this no branding ad busters politics, and that it doesn't come from the 80s or 90s, but from the 50s and 60s. It's the SI, the Situationist International, and the books like Society of the Spectacle. And so the brand, from the perspective of Guy Debord, would just be one instance of a generalized spectacle where the workers and the people in society are put in the position of being mere spectators to history rather than their active agents, right? So Guy Debord railed against the mediating spectacle of capitalist society. And I think there's some value in his work, but I would say that the vision, I came to the conclusion that his vision of a spectacular society, a society really mediated by imagery and affect and the media, was a utopian vision. It's actually what we want. What we have is a society mediated by labor and the amount and socially necessary labor time, which he kind of leaves out of his critique, even though he talks about the commodity.
So why would his vision, why is it a utopian vision actually, or an utopian?
Because real experience is always somewhat alienating. Like, we are never directly experiencing the world. We're experiencing the world through lenses and meanings and imagery and feelings and notions. And all those things are spectacles. They're virtual. We don't have a direct perception, an experience and relationship to the world. It's always mediated. And the spectacle, the idea that we're, as Guy Debord puts it, though, the idea that we're mediated by, Hollywood films and news reports and the feeling of a rock song and a sexy lady on the fashion runway and things like that. Like, to live in a world where that is actually what determines what's produced, how it's distributed, where you end up, what your workday is like, would be utopian in comparison to the kind of world where we actually live in, where what determines where you end up is, how well workers do on the factory floor, and what the role of technology is in augmenting and speeding up production. And it's like this book behind me, Bash Bash Revolution, is all about thinking about the spectacle as actually, in a way, utopian. Like going into the spectacle as the utopian solution beyond capitalism. So now, having said that, a brand is a property relation. It's not merely this an image or feeling. I mean, it is those things, but it's also a claim of ownership and a limit around those ideas. So, and it's very bad for the left to be branded, for left thinkers to be branded, because then everything you do, and this is an unfortunate reality of how things are. I mean, you cannot avoid it, but everything you do is thought of in terms of your brand identity. So like if I decide to interview Glenn Greenwald, that's a decision I'm making that is both based on my actual opinions and what he's saying and the ideas he's putting forward and the arguments that are made, but also about his brand and my brand. And how do those two things interact? And how will other branded identities perceive me in relationship to their brands? And I think that when it comes to like spaces like Twitter, you have a lot of people who aren't even monetizing their brand, who consider themselves to be brands, and who relate to other thinkers online, other people on Twitter as brands.
I always wonder about those people. Are they the smart ones or the dumb ones? The ones who think of themselves in terms of brand but unmonetized? Because I think I probably fall into that, the unthinking brand. So yeah. Anyway.
No, and to win at Twitter, you kind of need to, if you want to win at Twitter, which is a stupid thing. It's a stupid game to play. But
when you win at Twitter, do they send you an iPhone? Or what do you get?
No, cancellation is the ultimate prize.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I've won already.
I think there's another aspect. I mean, to think about this maybe more politically and the way that this influences how we think about politics. And I think more, in a more limited sense of the political, which is in relation to public opinion as well, where there's a constant obsession with mood and what the people want. So there's a kind of not just specifically branding, but more marketing, right? We're always obsessed. And we spoke actually the last episode we had a kind of critical discussion, the three of us, Phil, George, myself, about the Jacobin polling survey that they did, opinion survey of working class voters, right? Well, there's some interesting stuff there, but basically there's still this element of like, what are the people thinking? And the thing is that when the world used to be organized and when society used to be organized effectively into parties, into blocks, right? That the people were members of organizations, to a certain extent, the representatives of those organizations, those leaders, represented public opinion, right? Represented different views of different sections of society, different interests, different ideas, etc. Today, without that, it's like everyone's become, or anybody who's interested in politics or trying to win people over or even just carve out a niche is kind of desperately trying to figure out what the latent demand is, to put it in precisely marketing terms, and also spicing up the population into marketing categories. These are the white working class who are traditionalists but more left-leaning, or these are the progressive PMC and blah 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 blah. And we do it ourselves. We're constantly kind of doing this kind of marketing categories, often in relation to people who aren't saying anything. They're not manifesting themselves in any way. It's just what we assume is in their heads and that are their attitudes and concealed preferences, not revealed yet, or maybe only revealed by who they chose to push the button for at the ballot box. And that's about it, right? The level of political agency expressed there is extremely limited, if at all. And I think that's another way in which marketing thinking has infiltrated political thinking and obsesses us. And of course, political marketeers will do that. People who work for political parties, lobbyists, blah, 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 will do that and be concerned about that stuff. Let them do it, whatever. We can't stop them doing that. But I think it's terrible if us who have some ambition of changing the world and not just changing, but moving beyond precisely this kind of marketing obsession to then participate in it so much as well. I'd be more interested in talking about what people are doing and what the groups of people organized into movements, parties, whatever are doing, than just talking about what people actually want, which is always, to a certain extent, I think, a bit of a stage army. Everybody can point out, well, people actually want this. People actually want this because of what? Because of what people say on social media? because of what sentiment analysis shows us about social media, because of polling. These are all different forms of somehow creating consensus rather than any real reflection of actual expressed demand for something.
Well, I mean, a couple things come to mind. One is that when in the early days of podcasting, I actually read a bit about marketing, and I was trying to figure out how to get my podcast out there and get people to listen to it. And one of the approaches to marketing is this in content marketing, but there's another approach where it's audience built content marketing. And so the idea is that you go to your audience and ask them what they want, and then you give it to them. Like you don't think up what what you want to put out there, but you poll your audience, and then you build a product based on the desires that your audience expresses to you. And I guess the testing of whether or not that's really what they want is if they pay you for it or not, right? I mean, and the same thing's true when it comes to politics. Like, you do this analysis to find out what people want so that you can create a product in the form of a politician or a political campaign. And if it gets voted in, then you've done it right. So you get paid or you get voted in. So the problem, I guess, with this approach, as someone who likes to write and think and do things, I don't really love the idea of creating something that people want. I want to change what they want. Yeah. Like I want to reach in and alter these people. But maybe that's just because I'm a narcissist. But the other problem with it is that it goes back to this no branding thing, or the no logo. It treats the political actors, it treats citizens only as consumers. You create a commodity, or a brand that they want, and then you get elected, and that's the end of the road. It's not led by the voters or the citizens. It's not. It's treating them as passive objects that you survey. It's like that's the other problem with it. I think the political problem with it.
Yeah, and then of course you get the competing victimhood version of this, where you can find ever narrower segments of the true victims who, who are the only worthy ones, and then you get all the kind of sectarian backbiting within intersectionalist politics, broadly conceived, where they attack one another. It's like, but you can't trust white gays. You can only listen to the voice of black gays because those are the real oppressed. I think
that might be a good way to monetize something, but I don't think it's a great way to get elected.
No, right.
But I want to go to the other side of this no logo thing, because I think I've been praising no logo, and Klein, I want to criticize this book now. The problem with no logo, and the problem with the politics that were around me, at least at the time, is that they assumed that, like Guy Debord did, that what dictates society and the outcomes politically in society are primarily the attitudes and the players in society. So the political actors and the attitudes and the policies that they put forward, without considering the underlying material forces of things that are like around socially necessary labor time and the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, and those economic barriers and forces are kind of ignored. And that's why this sort of the contradictory politics of Naomi Klein could emerge. I mean, she wanted, on the one hand, to kind of return to a nationalist politics and be concerned with like American workers, I think, and at the same time, she was blasting the corporate sector for being colonialist and not concerned enough about the humanity of the people in the third world. So without realizing that the development would that for the undeveloped nations, development would have to be part of the equation, and that would have to some degree or another come from the developed world.
Thinking back, to No Logo for me was always kind of absorbed by the anti-globalization movement. So that was always what I associated it with as part of that era. And it's interesting what you say, like, she wanted a nationalist politics in a way. And they, in a sense, the anti-global, thinking back to it now, the anti-globalization people got what they wanted and not in the form that they wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, they were very excited about, the so-called Teamsters and Turtles Alliance, the fact that they managed to get trade unionists marching in Seattle with environmentalists, and that this was seen as a great achievement. And at the time, also, I think it was in Seattle. I mean, I don't know, maybe you were even there. I don't know. I went on the London version in 2000, but so if I'm remembering this rightly, I think it was in Seattle that the trade unionists dumped Brazilian steel into the harbor or something like that, in protest at the fact of the kind of depredations of NAFTA and steel dumping by our competitors with U.S. steel. And so, but now, they subsequently to that, the trade, or the workers at least, and the steel tariffs were set up by Trump. And the working class, at least in the Northeast, kind of swung away from what the place that had been imagined for them by the anti-globalization movement of earlier. And people like Naomi Klein and others and her allies kind of reacted with horror when you actually had a working class kind of nationalist, populist backlash in response to globalization in recent years. And so all of that, it strikes me as I haven't quite worked through how that politics kind of twisted and turned, but that it did essentially, they've been beaten when they actually saw, kind of a revived working class politics of a kind, at least in the form of Trump and Brexit and others, in the form of populism. They recoiled and they fell back onto defending neoliberalism effectively in various ways. And that's where they ended up. And, Naomi Klein is still kind of, she's still committed to, her new thing is climate and green politics. And so she's still tracing that arc in a sense, and is still, at least to that extent, she's plowed into the Green New Deal. And that's the kind of vision that her and many of the anti-globos now have ended up in. They've staked their hopes on some kind of supranational state arrangement.
Yeah, I suppose insofar as it would be something that would be implemented, like in the US, by the federal government, this Green New Deal, that would be in some sense a bit of a synthesis of their concerns from 20 years earlier.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, they would see maybe, some kind, like building new green industries and stuff. I imagine that would figure as part of their vision. Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, it's easy to see, though. I mean, I'm kind of sympathetic to Naomi Klein and to the 90s left. Of course, I'm of it, so I might as well be sympathetic to it. But you make demands that you think are going to be progressive, working class demands to help push the left forward in let's say a revolutionary struggle. For instance, you make the demand for $15 an hour minimum wage for everybody, to think that will lift up the more impoverished sectors of the working class and allow people to have the stability they need to organize politically. And you get that $15 an hour minimum wage, or at least average, through inflation and labor shortages.
Yeah.
So the demand means one thing in a certain historical moment and context and political reality, and when it's met, it might mean something completely different. And that's why I think the left has been defending neoliberalism. It's not that anyone wants to outright defend neoliberalism, but they don't want to lose a hold of any sort of international solidarity that might exist. And the only international force right now that there is a neoliberal one. The only way to cross ethnic divides is through a kind of neoliberal moralism.
I mean, obviously, it's the thinnest of cosmopolitanisms that they end up defending. And I mean, I would argue it probably has very little to do with internationalism, and they forget the nationalism part of internationalism, that there's at least a certain struggle in specific places and specific locales, which might refer to or engage in a national democracy, and try to kind of vault over that or ignore that or turn their back on it in the guise of internationalism. But, you know, really it's the absence of a struggle on the kind of at the national level, which allows them then to, in some sense, fantasize about an international struggle, which is really just, you know, leftists online talking across borders like we're doing right here.
Hey, don't take away that fantasy. What no. Left?
No, this is good. You know, it's good to have debate, but you know, it would be stupid to pretend that this is some great internationalist struggle that we're having right here, right now.
Right. No, I know, you're right. Yeah, I mean that's the trick. You do need national struggles. You need real workers who live in real places to organize politically in their interest in order to have the beginnings of a movement that might become a party. But you also want to have coordination between different working class sectors around the world. And obviously the best way to coordinate those workers is through podcasting.
Absolutely.
We've had podcasting come in as a solution to so many different issues over the past weeks even. But I think it was proposed as a solution to the silent majority. Give everyone podcasting mics. They're no longer silent. Right. Anyway. Okay, that's the end of this episode. In part 2, we talk about how the left has been overtaken by events and propose a typology of a left divided between progressives, populists, and Marxists. Progressives who are authoritarian, populists who are opportunists, and Marxists who are just lonely. You'll find that at patreon.com/bungacast, and it's out next week. So that's it for now. Catch you later. Bye-bye.